Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tulsa Litfest Keynote. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Great. Many of you know me by now because you've been to an event where I introduced myself, but I'm Dr. Eric Howerton. I'm the director of the Center for Poets and Writers, and we are one of the sponsoring organizations for Tulsa Litfest, along with Tri-City Collective, represented by Quresh Ali Lansana. Let's give Quresh a hand, please. And we're also partnering with Magic City Books this year, and we have a representative from Magic City in the back selling our Keynote books, so if after the presentations you would like to purchase a copy, you can do so at the back table. You may have noticed that environmentalism is a theme across several events at this year's Tulsa Litfest. You may not know that Oklahoma is over 75% agricultural land, and much of our state is dependent on the agricultural economy, the raising of crops and animals to feed people. Agriculture, it should come as no surprise, is dependent on the environment. Corn, wheat, sorghum, hay, cotton, all major Oklahoma products, can be affected in terms of yield by rain, drought, heat, and many of the other factors that we experience in an ordinary year. 1 pound of beef, which is one of Oklahoma's biggest agricultural exports, takes roughly 1,500 to 2,000 gallons of water to produce over the lifetime of that cow. Despite political turmoil, the environment is a pressing issue that we must pay attention to. And unlike political terms, the environment does not change over every 4 to 6 years or give us an opportunity to voice our displeasure for what's happening. Regardless of what we think or feel, the environment persists, affected by the past we have set for it. Only our actions can alter its course. The scientific community has been issuing this warning to us for years, but it seems catastrophically clear that doomsdaying our way through environmental issues has not produced the results that we want. Instead, this information seems to only have paralyzed us even more. Both of the poets you'll be hearing from tonight are not doomsdayers. They are not pessimists, at least not as far as I can glean from reading their work, nor are they here to shame you for driving your car or for drinking out of a plastic water bottle or ordering food to go. These poets celebrate nature by exploring its vastness. They admire its peace and its wiliness, its dialectical complexities. They unravel the preconceptions we have about the environment that lead us to disregard certain phenomena or remain indifferent to the world outside us. Both Hada and Molnar's poetry explore nature in ways that are not intended to wallow in the despair of environmental disaster, but to relish what has endured and what remains. If anything, Hada and Molnar invite us to love nature more, not to feel guilty for the current state of the world, but to learn to appreciate what is there. With no ability to advocate for itself, the environment must be advocated for by those who want to spend time in it and with it, who deeply know what it means to commune with nature, to have a transcendent moment with it, to experience internally the sublime that is externally waiting for us in every given moment. Yesterday I learned that Daniela Naomi Molnar is, or was, a scientist at a certain point in her life. I don't know if you still consider yourself a scientist. But that made a lot of sense to me as I was revisiting some poems from her upcoming manuscript, Memory of a Larger Mind, which comes out in October. She begins section 1 of the collection with a quote from James Baldwin that I'm going to reference and she will reference as well. What memory repudiates controls the human being, but one does not remember dictates who one loves or fails to love. In this collection, Molnar meditates a lot on glaciers, and this had me thinking, why is it so easy for us to not consider the calving of a glacier a catastrophe? Why is that a spectacle that people will actually incorporate into vacations? Keeping this Baldwin quote in mind, it made me think that it is impossible for us to remember the formation of the glacier. Right? And because we have no memory of its formation, this might seem like it condemns us to feel less empathetic to the erosion of it, to be able to love it less. But I don't think this is necessarily what Daniela had in mind. I think instead we're supposed to tune our minds closer to the environmental aspects that are being addressed here, that we are supposed to become more aware of what the glacier is as a living thing. There are many poems in this collection that anthropomorphize a glacier, and I want to make a distinction that it's not personifying a glacier, it's simply talking about what a glacier does that makes it seem alive. And so I'm going to read very quickly for you one of Daniela's poems, which I found particularly moving in this regard and gave me a different appreciation for the glaciers that she was talking about. So this is poem 7. Glacier, swath of scar, pale incandescent aqua glacier, web of dream veins, ancient ocean ice, glacier, tablature, terrain, rift, ridge, dip, bands of black, celadon, silver, gray. Glacier was and glacier left, and took whatever glacier meant to move. Glacier, body of riverine logics, spinal and vertebral, domed like a skull, rucked like a rib, concave like hunger or the entree to a hole, concave like hunger or the entree to a hole, or concave like a palm, cut to hold. Glacier, grizzled skin, pocked and fissured. Glacier, water mind, alluvial flesh. Glacier memory melting, rivulets and rivers, striations and folds, old skin breaking. Fractal and scarred glacier, a memory, a prediction, no origin spreads like light. Daniela Naomi Molnar is a poet, artist, and writer who creates with color, water, language, and place. Her debut book, Chorus, won the 2024 Oregon Award for Poetry and was selected by Kazim Ali as the winner of the Omnidon Press's second book award. Her paintings are created with pigments she makes from plants, bones, stones, rainwater, and glacial melt, and she actually foraged while she was in Tulsa to find more materials to use. Forthcoming books include Memory of a Larger Mind and Light Remains. Her book-length poem, Memory of a Larger Mind, accompanies photographs by Julian Stelter in The Glacier is a Being. Her work is anthologized in the forthcoming second volume of the Eco-Poetry Anthology and in Breaking the Glass, a contemporary Jewish poetry anthology from the Laurel Review. Molnar lives in Portland, Oregon, and in the high deserts of the North American West. Please give a big round of applause to Daniela Naomi.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's fascinating to hear one of my poems read to me. It's like I didn't write it. I discovered a lot by hearing that poem. Thank you. I'm really honored to be here tonight, and thank you for having me. I've never been to Tulsa before. Thank you to Eric and to Q and to everyone who made this possible. I know how much dedication it takes to make an event like this happen, and I'm very grateful to be a part of it. So I want to begin by saying a bit about where we are, which is complicated because I've never been to Tulsa before, as I said. So there's more that I don't know than I do know. A place is a practice. And like any practice, it demands time. So I can't know much. But here's what I do know. Here's what I've been able to glean from afar. I know we're in the northeast corner of Oklahoma, near the Arkansas River, where it's windy, green, and flat. I know the Muskogee, Creek, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw nations lived here in reciprocity with the land for generations, along with the Osage and other peoples, and that they were forcibly removed. I know we're in the reservation, or I think I know we're in the reservation of the Muskogee Creek Nation. I was told yesterday that we might be in multiple reservations, so correct me if I'm wrong. I know that the Osage Nation is immediately to the north, and that the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations all have capitals within a few hours' drive. I know the Arkansas River is a major tributary of the Mississippi. It originates in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, flows through Kansas to Oklahoma, and then on to Arkansas. In Oklahoma alone, it's dammed 4 times. I know I'm in Tulsa just a few weeks before the 105th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. I know I'm in a city whose wealth was drawn from the ground in the form of oil. A city whose history includes violence against Black prosperity, violence against indigenous sovereignty, and violence against the living world. And I know I'm speaking into a city with many thriving communities: Muskogee, Black, Zomi, Latino, Polish, Irish, Hmong, and an astonishing concentration of contemporary artists and writers who are imagining new futures, individually and together. I say all this at the start because my primary medium is always place, specifically the memories that are held in places. These memories live in all the inhabitants of a place, human and other than human, as well as in the waters and the earth of the place itself. Memories aren't only about the past. They're alive in the present, sometimes as inherited customs or deep attachments to the rhythms of a place, and sometimes as grief. Grief that isn't addressed doesn't disappear. It shows up as community conflict, as political rupture, as quieter imbalances in the living world around us. Engaging with this kind of memory is critical to our individual and collective future. We can't undo what's been done, but we can be unflinchingly honest with ourselves and with each other again and again about what we've inherited and how we want that inheritance to transform. When we don't do this work, fear takes over, and fear compels us to replicate the harm we or our ancestors inflicted or endured. I'm going to share some of the ways that I work with this place-based memory, a practice that braids poetry, visual art, and natural pigment making, as well as some ways that others approach this work. I'm sharing all of it because I think the work of transforming memories has particular relevance to Tulsa, and particular relevance right now. The first time I made pigment from a flower, I was thinking about my grandmother, Rosalie. For the first 6 years of my life, I spent my days with Rosalie and Marcy in their Queens brownstone. Rosalie was complicated, deeply traumatized and intensely loving, empathetic and self-centered, sensitive and full of rage. A poet with a 6th grade education who survived Auschwitz, but lost large parts of herself and most of her family and friends. Rosalie was born in June, when the flowers she loved so much are in full bloom. On her birthday years ago, I walked to a farmer's market and picked up a few hot pink peonies she would have adored. She loved that color and big, exuberant blooms. The peonies kept me company in a vase for several days, though every time I looked at them, my heart smarted with love and loss. I decided to make a pigment from those peonies. The process involves many transformational steps, each one creating a shift, until you've moved from a flower to a vivid powder that is part flower, part mineral. I followed each step, and the hot pink flowers became a bright chartreuse. The color gleamed, green gold, the color of new life, of spring's first buds, the peony's bracts before it learned to bloom. Astounded, cracked open, smiling and sobbing at once, I felt this color reach into the core of me and settle there. I felt Rosalie's memories shift. I saw them shift. I felt her spirit so imbricate with my own spark and fizz. I felt her say to me through this color, live, be alive, press the essence from the hour. That's my wish for you. On an atomic level, most of our world is empty space. The atoms of which all matter is made consist of a field of electrons circling a tiny central nucleus. Electrons so small, they behave not like matter, but like empty space. These are drawings that my students made years ago when I asked them to draw empty space. In the words of physicist Frank Close, the atom is, quote, apparently a perfect void, 99.99999% empty space. And yet this void is only apparently empty. It's full of charged electrons, teeming and active. It's this active emptiness that gives solidity to matter, that makes the world the world. The chair you're sitting in, your lungs breathing the air, and the air itself, all are what they are because of their fundamental emptiness, not in spite of it. I think of this active emptiness as a type of memory, a thick web of connections. Because everything in the universe is made of atoms, and because atoms are made of active emptiness, this memory is common to all matter. What we consider living, animals, plants, and people, and what we don't, rock, smoke, and water. In the active emptiness, strange things happen. Among them, quantum entanglement, what Einstein called, quote, spooky action at a distance, in which two particles separated by vast distance appear to instantly influence each other's state, seemingly defying the speed of light. Doesn't this sound like memory? Have you ever felt that someone with whom you share memories has had something significant occur, even across great distance or across the boundary of death? I have. Active emptiness resists logic but welcomes intuition, resists ideas but welcomes feelings, just like memory. There is a resistance to memory inside memory itself, writes Jacqueline Rose. Look at it straight on, and it will shimmy and degrade. Look at it sidelong, look at it slant, and it will share its story. Active emptiness can travel from one entity to another, from soil to carrot, from air to lung, from bumblebee to flower. In these transitions, it changes external form, yet remains fundamentally the same. It's still an atom. The memories do the same, changing external form, but continuing to exist. Many years of careful attention, the kind Simone Weil called absolutely unmixed attention, which involves not just the mind, but the body, heart, and spirit, have taught me that intentionally shifting matter from one form to another can alter the matter's active emptiness, its memory. Nightmarish memories can be lullabied, poisonous memories can be made medicinal. Angry memories can unclench their fists, not permanently, not finally, but shifted for now towards something less destructive, more livable. My experience making pigment for Rosalie is one example of this. Since that day with her peonies, pigment making has become a primary component of my artistic practice. To make Rosalie's pigment, I used a process called laking. Laking is a chemical process in which a botanical pigment is bound to a mineral, making it light fast while creating a chimera, a hybrid of plant and rock. It involves volcanic chemical reactions, striking color shifts, clouds of steam and mounds of foam, transitions from liquid to solid and back. It's as much theater as science, as much ritual as chemistry. A disciplined alchemical process, a strict container in which transformations freely occur. To make a lake pigment is to relinquish control and collaborate with one's mediums. In all these ways, a lake pigment, in process and outcome, is a lot like a poem. And like a poem, it has to be made again and again, each time anew. A lake pigment transforms matter, a poem transforms language. Both are ways to transform memory. For years now, I've been working on a project called Memory of a Larger Mind, of which the book that Eric read an excerpt of is part of. The project is big, and it takes many forms: visual art, 3 books of poems and essays, collections of pigments, and community events. It happens in various places throughout the world, but it always begins the same way. I go to a specific place that carries ecological, historical, or cultural weight, a place of heightened memory. The sites include glaciated landscapes, former concentration and incarceration camps, and desecrated sacred sites. Political, cultural, and environmental violence have occurred in these places. These kinds of violence almost always occur in tandem or succession. One aim of this work is to challenge the widespread but erroneous separation of environmental issues from sociopolitics, a division rooted in the equally false notion that humans and nature are distinct entities. These places are marked by both desecration and resilience. They are culturally, politically, and ecologically damaged, and they're actively regenerating. My work is to help catalyze the regeneration that's already underway. I start by listening. I listen to the plants, waters, weather, trees, humans, animals, insects, birds. I listen through my ears, but also through my eyes, hands, feet, tongue, nose, mind, gut, and heart. The listening leads me to foraging sites, public parks, wildernesses, sidewalks, vacant lots, rivers, drain pipes, roads. Some sites are sublime, some quotidian. Some are enduring or recovering from obvious harm, others appear pristine. Then I bring those memories, the plants, bones, stones, sounds, words, and waters I've gathered, into my studio and transform them into poems and pigments. Both are containers for the transformed memories of the place. The pigments become paintings, sculptures, or installations. They also serve as an archive, a reference library for the place, which I use when I'm writing. The writing and the visual work are inextricable. All of this is a way to transform the memories of places in need of transformation. I understand a place as a shared vision made of matter and memory, which is constantly being reshuffled and reimagined by all forms of life. Any creative act can spur that reimagination in good ways. Art can change the memories of the act of emptiness in ways nothing else can. I'll make this more concrete. What you're seeing here is what I call a palette of place, a set of pigments made from a specific site. This one is in progress. It's from Hell's Canyon, which is the deepest river gorge in North America, cut through the basalt between Oregon and Idaho. When I made this palette, I was in the ancestral home of the Nez Perce, a land from which they were forcibly removed. I was also close to the site of the 1887 Chinese massacre, where at least 34 Chinese gold miners were murdered on the banks of the river by a group of white horse thieves. No one was ever convicted. The bodies went into the water. And I was standing next to a river whose salmon runs, which have sustained human and other than human life in this watershed for more than 10,000 years, have been driven to the edge of extinction by a series of dams. 3 erasures layered in one place: indigenous removal, racial massacre, species collapse. The canyon and the river hold all of it at once. What you see here are lake pigments made from plants, pigments made from the mule deer bones that were picked clean by scavengers, and mineral pigments made from rocks. The mineral pigments are iron rich. The iron was laid down by Columbia River basalt flows 15 million years ago, weathered over the eons since, and carried to where I gathered it by water that is a remnant of those same flows. This color exists in geologic time. I could paint a chromatic approximation of this color from a tube labeled burnt sienna, and it would signify nothing. But when I paint with this pigment or write with it as my archive, I'm interacting with the actual ground of Hell's Canyon. The color carries the place's presence because the material is the place. If you were at last night's reading, you heard me read a poem from this place, a poem written with the memories of this place, written with the mirror, written with the river. Here is a painting in progress, and here is the painting made with these same colors. When I create with these materials, I trick myself into quieting my own agency so that the place can render itself through me. Here's some detail views. My role is to translate from place to language or from place to image. I work this way because I believe a place is not a backdrop for human dramas. Places have consciousness, they're interlocutors, and most of the time we don't give them the conditions under which they can speak. I'll share one more example, an approach that's recently become central to the project. In Ashkenazi folk tradition, there's a practice called feldmesten, literally field measuring. It was historically done by women and gender-fluid folks as a way to cross the border between the living and the dead. It was done during times of community crisis as a way to restore harmony. Feldmesten involves taking a length of thread and measuring the perimeter of a grave, or the perimeter of a whole cemetery. The thread then becomes the wick of a memorial candle. The thread that measured the dead becomes the thread that brings light. It's a tactile, embodied form of remembrance. It's also, I'd argue, a type of poem. It makes a precise line that generates light. I've been extending this practice to one of the sites of memory of a larger mind in the Oregon high desert, which you see here, where I've been measuring ancient bodies of water that are being drained by a combination of climate change and industrial agriculture. These drying waters are a critical stop in the Pacific Flyway, a 10,000 nautical mile north-south migratory route that stretches from Alaska to Patagonia. Millions of birds rely on these waters on their long journeys. If the water disappears, the birds will die. So I've also been measuring taxidermied birds at a local wildlife refuge. Human livelihoods, ways of life, and the lives of millions of birds are all tangled up in this place, bound together by the same rapidly draining aquifer. The measurements are a way to honor these entanglements and bring them momentarily into one untangled line. I take these measuring threads home and dip them in a combination of beeswax and pigments from the sites. These are some of the pigments. The candles will be burned as part of a series of community conversations this fall. I'm doing this work because I want to make art that embodies the place's grief, which is also the grief in the human community currently causing overt conflicts. If I can embody the grief, the people who encounter the art might be able to feel something in response. Ecological grief is often experienced as numbness, apathy, an inability to feel, because it's an enormous grief, so enormous that it dwarfs us, cancels us out. The extinction of salmon runs, the drawdown of aquifers that took 10,000 years to fill, mass graves paved over. These are losses that don't fit inside one person's body. They exceed what a single mind or heart can hold. To feel something, even a hard something, is freeing. A feeling has force. It creates movement and change. The thread is a way of making the loss small enough to carry, something I can hold in my hands so I can feel what's too large to know. This is what I mean when I say that the act of emptiness is the realm of memory. Memory lives in the land, it lives in the water, and our job, the job of artists, of poets, of writers, of anyone who cares, is to make ourselves into instruments sensitive enough to register that space, and to use the sensitive instruments of our bodies and minds to make work that shows the shape of that loss. If I had more time here in Tulsa, I'd like to measure Greenwood. The places that were burned, the graves, the shadow of the freeway that bisects what was once a thriving community, and the river that received the dead. I'd like to make those measurements into candles, into poems, and sit by their light and listen to the people who have worked for years for reparations, organizers, lawyers, descendants, and survivors. The horrors that occurred here were intentionally silenced, but the memories didn't go anywhere. The memories remain in the earth, in the water, in the plants, in the air. To address what happened here requires economic, political, and social action. These are essential. And the memories here also need to be intentionally changed, or in Leah Purpura's word, enlivened. Touched, moved, acknowledged into being. I'll be thinking of you all in this community in a few weeks, hoping these memories find their way toward vital change. By now it's probably obvious that I view writing as an embodied multimedia practice and an expanded field of creation. But I want to turn to writing in its more traditional sense, with words. Given the title of our event tonight, I'll start by asking, what does it mean for words to be wild? Wildness, for me, is an elemental kind of freedom. It can happen anywhere, for anyone, not just in those vanishingly rare places where human influence is scarce. I don't actually think wildness and humanness are at odds with each other. Rather, I think humans actually need wildness to be fully human. And I think language is one of our wildest tools. Language is a fraught and complicated medium. We use it to order our coffee and to hash out health insurance and our taxes, and then we use the very same medium to make art. It's a big ask. So in order for language to be wild enough, free enough to make art, writers often engage in some form of strangification. That's the term linguist Victor Shklovsky used to describe the intentional defamiliarization writers often practice, to clear language of the remnants of all its other uses to make it clean and weird again. He understood it as a primary goal of poetry. Strangified language can change how we see and feel the world. Shklovsky argued that we generally experience life, quote, as if packaged, and that art exists to restore the sensation of life, to make us feel, not just know the world. It can, in his words, make the stone stony. A strangified word is mysterious, powerful, and wild. It can alter perception itself. Words make worlds. And a strangified word, such as these by Derek Walcott, is up to the task. Strangification is especially essential for English language writers. Like the earth, like the water, language holds memory. And English is a language of immense violence. Kaveh Akbar says it perfectly. One example of this dangerous technology here in Tulsa is the language of riot versus massacre. These are not synonyms. A language that has called something a riot for 100 years has been doing work, specific, insurance-shaped, history-shaped work. And changing the word begins to change the ground. This is one example of how a weapon can begin to heal. Mehta Sama is a poet whose practice lives right in the seam of Akbar's question. Based in North Carolina, she's the founder of Artists Against Police Brutality and a senior fellow of the Black Earth Institute. The eco-social braid, the assertion that societal violence and ecological violence are a single phenomenon, is intrinsic to how her work is made and where it circulates. Her poems are radically vulnerable in the face of vulnerability, violent in the face of violence, hungry in the face of hunger. They refuse closure. She writes in a tradition of experimental poetics that pushes against the idea that a poem needs a single voice or a subject that behaves. They wield language with a full awareness that it's a tool with blood on it. Importantly for this talk, Sama treats poetic space, the white space around and between words, as an active emptiness, a living site where what cannot be said is nonetheless conveyed. In other words, the ample spaces in her poems are the shape of loss. Her poetics makes these shapes visible and shares them with us so that they can be changed. I've been reading Mehta Sama's work for a long time. I want to read you one poem and then tell you why it's been cycling through my head as I've been writing this talk. This is the whole poem, and I know it's too small for you to read the words, but you can see the shape of it and how she's using space there. So this is her poem called An Open History of Saltwater. What hands toss these bodies over bridges, my body, heavy with hefted rope necks, bulleted palms and foreheads and mouths, emptied of impulse, face down faces, lowest lungs, breath, slump, internal deformation, sheath, fold, muscled bodies, emptied breaths into my mouth, rivered their hair, sand their feet, turned sand, their backs, brains, waterlogged depositories, immersion artifacts, skin like a washerwoman, goose, bar of soap, emptied of memory, salt their tongues, salt their cocks, salt their loaded breasts. Now their bodies are my bodies, fluvial and my body, their memories, lying in me, releasing me into them, into open. Our mouths open, lungs open, stories, mouths float open and coarse and the poem begins with an unanswered question. What hands toss these bodies over bridges? And moves line by line through the dissolution of those bodies into the river that received them. Lowest lungs, slump, internal breath, deformation, sand, brains, hair rivered into the speaker's mouth. Waterlogged depositories, immersion artifacts. The bodies are historical, and they are also supremely present. Now their bodies are my bodies, the speaker says near the end. The past didn't go anywhere. It's lodged in the living body of language and of the one who speaks. Look at the space of this poem. Sama isn't writing in left-aligned couplets. She's arranging shaped bodies of text on the page, bodies that lean into the empty space around them like bodies falling. Halfway through, there's a moment where she places empty quotation marks in the poem, punctuation with nothing inside it. A sighted silence. In the words of poet Cynthia Oka, redaction becomes the condition of speaking. Redaction becomes the condition of revelation. Sama is showing us that what has been silenced or erased still occupies space. The redaction, too, is language, and it's alive. And then, and this is why the poem has been cycling through my head, she repeats the word open 5 times in 14 words at the end of the poem. Open, open our mouths, open. This is exactly what Shklovsky meant by strangification. The word becomes so saturated that it stops functioning as a word and starts functioning as a force, an imperative, a refusal. The poem will not close. The mouths will not close. The ampersand at the end of the poem is not a period. It's an insistence that the grammar of this violence is ongoing. It was only after I arrived in Tulsa that I realized one way Sama's poem and this city connect. Leslie Benningfield Randall, also known as Mother Randall, the sole living survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre, testified before Congress that the dead of her neighborhood, her neighbors, her family, her friends, were thrown into the Arkansas River, just a few miles from where we're sitting. The water remembers. When Sama's poem asks, what hands toss these bodies over bridges, she isn't referring specifically to Randall's neighbors, but she's writing about every water body that's ever been used as a grave. And she's reminding us that the past didn't go anywhere. Sama's speaker, now their bodies are my bodies, is describing post-memory with precision. Post-memory, a term coined by the scholar Marianne Hirsch, describes the relationship of later generations to a trauma they didn't live through firsthand. These experiences get transmitted, she says, so deeply and effectively as to seem to constitute memories in their own right. Post-memories are made of what's not said, the spaces between words, the language below language, the gaze averted, the gesture stalled. The effect of post-memories on the rememberer is no different from that of a first-hand memory, and often far stronger. Post-memories can shape identities so profoundly that one's own life story can feel displaced by the stories of one's ancestors. Sama's mouth is full of the water, and the water doesn't forget. There's one more thread in Sama's work I want to pull. In Swing at Your Own Risk, which is one of her books, she builds a long poem around the liturgical repetition of the word Salah. a Hebrew word whose meaning isn't fully known, but which has been read as a noun meaning rock, or as a verb to weigh or to measure. A poet reaches into the Psalms and finds a word for weighing grief, as I reach for thread to measure what otherwise can't be quantified. Weight and length, heft and breadth, two metaphors of measurement addressing the same longing, each a way to make shareable and feelable the shape of what's been lost. This is what I mean when I say that the memories of places do not stay put. They find their ways into bodies, generation after generation. With practice, dedication, and time, they can be transformed, and the transformation, too, can be shared. The act of emptiness arrives in Metasama's hands as a poem about a river full of bodies. It arrives in my hands as a thread or pigment or a poem built from these things. The work of the artist, the poet, the writer, the work Sama is doing, the work I'm trying to do, the work many of you in this room are doing, is to keep the ampersand where a period would foreclose the possible, to keep breathing the language of memory into the future's lungs, where it can reinvent, regenerate, and reimagine what's to come. I came to Tulsa knowing very little about this place. I'll leave knowing a little more. And mostly I'll leave carrying questions. That to me is the work of memory, the work of making, the work of staying open. Thank you for allowing me to share this time with you.
Please, another round of applause for Daniela. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd be remiss if I didn't offer some thank yous and just a few additional notes about this event. After Ken Hada delivers his keynote, we will have a reception in this space. We'll have some K-Gusto catering over here on the left. So please hang around after Ken's keynote, mingle with the authors, buy a book, maybe check out the merch table. If you have any questions, that would be the time then to approach the authors and talk to them then, because we won't have a formal Q&A. We'll just have a little mixed reception afterwards. I really want to extend a deep gratitude to Kyle Hayes and Tulsa Review. They are the co-sponsors of this event. Kyle, would you mind? If you are not familiar, Tulsa Review is the literary journal of TCC. If you're looking for places to submit your work, please check out their website and offer them some great poems and some great fiction and some great essays if you have them waiting in the wings. I also want to thank our venues and our partners for this year's 2026 Tulsa Litfest. Obviously, thanks to OSU Tulsa for allowing us to use these spaces, Magic City Books for also hosting many of the events, the Center for Public Secrets for hosting all of our events yesterday, Greenwood Rising, TUN 101 Archer, the TCC McKeon Center for Creativity, Tulsa Review, Heirloom Rustic Ales, Good Cause Brewing, the Tulsa Artists Fellowship, Chimera Cafe, Pershing Studios, and NYU Tulsa. And we have representatives from NYU Tulsa. We have Lindsay Smith and Carl Jones at the table over there. So thank you so much. Also, not immediately after, but a half an hour after this event ends, we will have a haiku death match at Good Cause Brewing. We're still looking for participants. I don't think you have to have haikus already written. I think you will be given prompts and write them on the spot. Okay? So, please join us after the reception, after you've stuffed yourself with K-Gusto. Come to Good Cause Brewing, support a local brewery, have some friendly competition, with our local poets and maybe deliver some either profound or profoundly bad news. Our next speaker is Ken Hada, and there was a part of Daniela's keynote that actually really, I think, perfectly encapsulated what I experience when I read Ken's work. Daniela, you said something to the effect of, art can restore the sensation of life. Is that close? Okay. And I feel like when I read Ken's poetry, I feel that restoration happening in the moment. Ken Hada writes with a directness that paints a picture so vivid, you swear it must have happened sometime, somewhere, other than your imagination. I'm reminded at times of the mature awareness and sensibility of Theodore Roethke and the stark imagistic quality of Bukowski, minus all the baggage and minus all the bitterness. Ken's poetry reminds me of the natural interactions I seek outside that I'm somehow finding on the page. When I'm drained from modernity and in need of recharge, I often find solace in nature, and I see that same tendency in Ken's poetry, but I also find his poetry magic enough to create a sensation of the natural, even when I am not surrounded by it. For example, a poem like Blue River, which Ken, I think, will read parts of, and I will read it to you in full, and there's nothing wrong with hearing a poem twice. That's how you're probably supposed to do it. But a poem like Blue River captures so much of what I think about when I'm hiking in Oklahoma, and it captures so much of the clarity that I'm trying to achieve when I'm hiking, when I'm trying to forget the complexities and the pessimisms of modernity. Blue River reminds me of hiking along the Kiamichi River. There's a sense of calm, of clarity, of truth, of the immediacy before the mind adds its hyperbolic interpretations, its artifice of self. Blue River is a poem that is so direct that I can't help but feel it as I read it. Blue River. She calls to me secluded pools along quiet shores beneath canopies of white oak and red cedar. My pace slows, thoughts diminish, sounds hush in the cloistered place. I sit in the shadows, smoking a soft cigar, the full moon peeking over the ridge. Beyond dense timber, purling water and tree frogs abide a humble campfire. I have no need tonight for noise, no desire for that other life. Only primal sounds matter. These ancient rituals merging fire and water, earth and sky. Ken Hada is a poet and professor at East Central University in Ada, Oklahoma, where he directs the annual Scissortail Creative Writing Festival. Do we have anybody who's attended Scissortail? Awesome. Ken finds the natural order a powerful presence for writing. His work has received the 2022 Oklahoma Book Award, the 2017 SCMLA Poetry Prize. He's been featured in the Writer's Almanac, received the Western Heritage Award, named a finalist for the Spur Award, and is a 6-time finalist for the Oklahoma Book Awards. In 2017, Ken gratefully accepted the Glenda Carlisle Distinguished Service Award for the Oklahoma Center for the Book. His published poetry includes 12 collections, such as Visions for the Night Come Before Winter, Feral Skies, Contour Feathers, Sunlight and Cedar, and others. The Ken Hada Collection is held at the Western History Collection Library at the University of Oklahoma. Ken enjoys reading his work at venues around the country. Everybody please give a warm round of applause to Ken Hada.
Thank you, Dr. Carlson, Eric. What a great conference this has been, and thank you for all the work you do, Eric. It's a lot of work, and I appreciate it. And Q and Tulsa Review and everyone who's been involved with this, thank you very much. Like Daniela, I'm honored to be here. And you're brilliant. I mean, that was just lovely. I kept thinking, wow, that's touching some things I'm going to accept. The brilliance of it is very moving. I'm grateful for that. I begin with N. Scott Momaday. Once in his life, a man ought to concentrate his mind upon the remembered earth. He ought to give himself up to a particular landscape in his experience, to look at it from as many angles as he can, to wonder about it, to dwell upon it. He ought to imagine that he touches it with his hands at every season and listens to the sounds that are made upon it. He ought to imagine the creatures there and all the faintest motions of the wind. He ought to recollect the glare of noon and all the colors of the dawn and dusk. For we are held by more than the force of gravity to the earth. It is the entity from which we are sprung, and that into which we are dissolved in time. The blood of the whole human race is invested in it. We are moored there, rooted as surely, as deeply as are the ancient redwoods and bristlecombs. But many may never have had this experience to draw upon, may not have a sacred landscape. And far too many of us, this memory has been and often is interrupted. Certainly this was true for Momaday's ancestors on the Western Plains. Certainly it was true for Black Americans coming to the territory, seeking a new life after emancipation. In our contemporary culture today, our experience, what you're experiencing, what I'm experiencing, the current news assaults our psyches. We are bombarded with war in Iran, white Christian nationalism, the Epstein files, ICE running rampant in the streets, identity and race issues under attack, inflation, tariffs, Supreme Court giving immunity to the president, divided families, etc. And here we are with all this chaos circling us, trying to talk about the environment, specifically writing and the environment. This seems almost irrelevant at times, given all the other frustrating news that dominates our headlines. And yet, here we are. Like the foundation of a building, the environment supports all our goings and comings, all our politicking, all our familial life, every aspect of culture, of human existence, obviously rests on the foundation of a healthy environment, and yet we ignore it, remain ignorant of it, live in denial of the challenges and issues facing it. We take it for granted. So tonight I'm thankful that you are here joining me to consider ourselves in relation to our environment. I'm grateful for the opportunity to reflect on my own writing life as it intersects with environmental concerns and ecological values. Maybe, first of all, as writers, our job is to remind us of our truest selves, to help us belong, to fortify each other, as writers and as audience members, in our efforts to maintain our truest self. Maybe our job is not to let ourselves and our fellow citizens forget that we are part of nature, that each of us, gay and straight, urban and rural, conservative or liberal, these terms don't mean anything anymore, and all of our racial and ethnical heritage and contemporary selves, all of this, we all share a planet with limited resources. And it seems to me today, the poet must play the role of a prophet. We must move beyond art for art's sake, and even beyond self-expression, to create art for the sake of cultural sanity and ecological survival. Our task involves both forecasting the potential outcomes of our destructive patterns, as well as closely analyzing the realities of our contemporary world in this present moment, how we might live, how we are sustained. The essential reality is that we cannot escape the fact that our humanness is concomitantly linked to the ecosystems that house us. Aldo Leopold, nearly 80 years ago, lamented, "You'd think conservatives and conservation might have some overlap." But alas, here we are. If we dare speak about the conservation of our natural resources, we are dismissed, insulted, branded as a radical environmentalist, as if hugging a tree is somehow a problem, somehow a weakness. However, I think that all of us, regardless of political prejudice and belief, I think all of us know deep down that the issues that comprise environmental writing will not go away. Like returning dandelions, like twisted, stubborn blackjacks on a dusty prairie. Some matters endure and they require our attention, unless we want to join Elon Musk on his toy spaceship and live on Mars. Thank you. So we are here this evening, gathered under the banner of Wild World, Wild Words. And this title reminds me of Thoreau's dictum, "In wildness is the preservation of the world." But despite the essential fact of wilderness as an undeniable force in the human context, we fear wildness. We try to ignore it, or we pretend it's something other than it is, as if it is something that can be artificially simulated, as if it is something optional, substitutable, rather than essential. Maybe it is the poet's job to remind us of the wildness within, even as we paint the wilderness that colors the globe we call home. Since Leopold's seminal book, A Sand County Almanac, published in 1949, in which he thoughtfully and even heroically articulated an ethic about wilderness, among other ideas, since then, nearly 80 years ago, a proliferation of writing about nature, about the environment has occurred. Everyone from Rachel Carson to Gary Snyder to Wendell Berry to Barry Lopez to Andy Dillard to Terry Tempest Williams, to name just a few, that great tree of American book market has been covered with thousands of leaves, all appreciating, loving, informing, advocating, warning about the environment. And so we are left with an uneasy question. What good does writing about the environment do? Can poetry change the perception of a consumer-laden populace? And so it is in this context I'd like to offer a few of my own poems to suggest how landscape and wildness informs my own sense of self. And I start with Cimarron, which translates to wildness. A wildness that will not fade calls in the crimson twilight. Our tangled roots of dirt and desire and denial are embedded in cyclical rhythms linked to the full moon shining over Cherokee County, pulling the Cimarron River along to the Arkansas, filtering sand from clay, leaving the heron a feast, the mallard a respite. Survivors know these rhythms, these voices calling out in wild red darkness. A bit about me. My family migrated from Hungary in the 1890s to the prairies and gypsum hills of northwest Oklahoma. My father, tired of the tractor, became a minister and was transplanted to the Ozarks to pastor a small country church. So I grew up with two homes and two identities. Though the landscapes of these two places are very different on the surface, in my imagination and in my experience, both places offered wildness. Unaccountable numbers of stars on a dark night in West Oklahoma, an endless landscape of prairie grass filled with flycatchers and quail among bluestem, sage, and the acrid smell of forever. This home was parallel to my living in the Ozark Mountains, saturated with dogwood, walnut, and oak. The sacred Buffalo River was our family river. The landscape, marked by honeycomb terrain from which we drank our spring water. I drank spring water out of a rock for 16 years. No wonder I'm so good looking. On a more serious note, in both contexts, the people were close to the land, inseparable from it, really. Our days were marked by the movements of the seasons. We understood the wildlife, the fauna and flora. We celebrated the great variety of songbirds, even as we heard the owls at night, the geese in pre-dawn, the wind, all the more remarkable when evening stillness fell. And we knew we belonged. I was raised poor, but I was raised as a child of landscape, and I have never outgrown that in my travels, and even when I've had my tenures in DFW and other urban places. So my first poetry attempts combined my attempts to make sense of pain, dysfunction, and poverty, and bad religion, all within the context of landscapes that informed, inspired, and instructed. And to my surprise, some people tended to like my poems, some of them anyway, and I was labeled a nature poet. And that felt odd, because I wanted not to be merely sentimental, since nature can be so very harsh. But also because the label nature poet suggested mere representation, something pretty but lacking in artistic quality, and I wanted to be a real artist. People would approach me and tell me how they liked a particular poem, say about a river or a place that reminded them of their grandma's homestead, but something felt like was missing. As someone seriously concerned with environmental issues, I'm often troubled, even as I welcome the appreciation. Don't they understand, I would think to myself, that the lyric or the aesthetic of the poem has a subtext? We have to protect the river. We cannot blacktop and overwhelm the prairie homesteads with the high-def lights, invasive grass, urban sprawl, fracking, and all the things that war with nature. So, how to be a nature poet, but also a prophet about environmental concerns, concerned me. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know if it could be done. So what I did sometime after grad school, I adopted the term literary ecologist for myself as one who sees the world from an interdependent relationship, a de-centering of human economies and man-made tragedies. And I learned to read texts not only from an anthropomorphic point of view, to understand the sentient of the land, the feeling of the land, the community of the land. And that offered insight and some solace. It defined me and sustains me. But still I wonder, can poetry affect the change I want and that you want? Can it protect the hardwoods, keep the streams flowing clean, keep oil leaks out of the Gulf, and on we could go. Like many poets, when I first started writing poetry, I was way too expository, too preachy, and I felt the need to explain every part of the written text and the implied subtext, but the artistic value of the poem suffered. After all, if you have to explain the poem, maybe you didn't write it well enough. Maybe it still needs winnowing. That was and is my challenge. I want everyone to be honest, committed stewards over ecosystems, and I'm thinking I'd rather belong to a society that practices sound ecology than for me to be a successful poet. But of course I want both, and so I keep trying. Now some have suggested that poetry is its own unique discourse, and so perhaps subconsciously or surreptitiously, the care for the environment is communicated within and throughout the actual discourse of the poetic form. In other words, the images, the structure, the white space, the layered language, all of it combined speaks to the heart of audience members who hear it and are moved to think about the poem's deeper reality and by association to ingest its truth. I'd like to believe that, but still I worry. After all, if Wendell Berry or Robinson Jeffers or Gary Snyder didn't change forever the American populace, how can I? What does writing in general, and poetry in particular, do for a planet gasping for relief? I'd like to illustrate this a bit from the poem that Eric read, Blue River. She calls me to secluded pools along quiet shores beneath canopies of white oak and red cedar. My pace slows, thoughts diminish, sounds hush in this cloistered place. I sit in shadows, smoking a soft cigar, the full moon peeking above the ridge. Beyond the dense timber, purling water and tree frogs abide a humble campfire. I have no need tonight for noise, no desire for that other life. Only primal sounds matter, these ancient rituals, merging fire and water, earth and sky. For me, the nexus of the poem, speaker and place, moves toward that phrase, that other life. That is, the existence that attempts to tame wildness, that other life which contrasts to the Blue River experience, which is primal, marked by ancient rituals. elemental rituals. In other words, something essential to restore the calm wildness to the soul. I've titled this presentation, Writing Like There's No Tomorrow, for a couple of reasons. For one thing, sometimes it seems there really is no tomorrow. And in this world, the imminent crises of war and a disregard for the Constitution may relegate environmental concerns to the back burner. But the tragic irony, of course, is that we will, in fact, run out of tomorrows if we don't take care of the environment, along with all the other challenges that we face. In this current time of anxiety, I think coming together is so important. Our literary festivals with feature authors, as well as the more informal, intimate settings with our friends and neighbors reading to each other on the back porch. More than ever, I think we need to come together to recognize, to belong to the community of devoted souls, humans trying to be fully human, refusing despair and plastic consumerism. In addition to our ranting rage at the political atrocities, we must, for the sake of our souls, our wild souls, we must also pay homage to the natural orders that precede us, that shape us and govern us if we are willing to be aware. What good is a poem when the world is on fire? Well, I can't think of a better way to sustain ourselves, even if necessary, to eulogize ourselves. Maybe we can learn something from the mayfly. Maybe what I love most about rivers is how they bend together towards some mystic whole we imagine. Confluence is a lovely word, a word that implies sharing, getting along, making new space from disparate parts. No atom, no action exists alone. Water joins tree and plant, sand and soil, grass and flower. Even the mayfly that emerges but for a desolate moment only to die plays its part to perfection. When we commit to the rhythms of nature, we find ourselves moving toward harmony within ourselves. The meditative quality of life and death of nature, meditative quality of the life and death of nature provokes our own sense of destiny, however humble, and inspires a truer sense of self that cannot be so easily bought and sold. We are nearly angels, I've been told. We should dominate the earth then, I've heard. But other voices whispering in night breezes say we are part of an unimaginable whole. Grains of sand, drops in a river, stars in countless galaxies. Say only fools wish to trade places with angels. I'm thinking of William Stafford, who emphasizes silence, waiting, and receptivity, and the courage to fail. He writes, quote, "For the person who follows with trust and forgiveness what occurs to him, the world remains always ready and deep, an inexhaustible environment with the combined wildness of an actuality and flexibility of a dream." What comes to us may be material from art, but it can be unsettling. Trying to keep balance, trying to stay in tune with the song of the universe reminds us of our transient reality. This is something I struggle with. I talk very easily about transience, our lives flowing like wind and water. Isn't that pretty? But in truth, I struggle with change. And if you're like me, you find interruptions a real pain in the pocket. But writing leads me to acceptance of what is. Here are a couple of early poems about transience. River Song. Motion helps us understand, helps us cope. It is right to move downstream, to avoid stasis, to resist delusions of permanence, the futility of holding on, to feel the flowing around me, through me, is life, to be one with the current, this much is real. And with another element, wind song. Tell me secrets in the night sky. Whisper lines the ancients knew. Night voices sing hope. Fire imagination, kindle souls into red flame that destroys, but purges, reseeds, creating these Saturnian voices singing of transience. I believe most people, when they first begin to write poetry, understandably tend to rely on two almost predictable topics, either some place or object in nature to be represented, or their personal identity to understand, value, defend. And I would like to merge those necessary impulses and locate them in what I call the natural self, in which I am suggesting that becoming natural with ourselves is a primary goal of art, defining ourselves within the contours of the cosmos. Who am I really? Am I only a fragment of being? Am I destined to be a stranger in exile on my own planet, in my community, in my family? Am I divided into gender, hobbies, and education, and religion, and class, and race? Am I simply a consumer, a user, oblivious to the effect of my presence on the planet, an imposter? Or can a fragmented self, with those broken pieces, can they coalesce like gravel of various shapes and sizes and densities into a stream bed through which our writing, our poetry is clarified as it is transported? And in that transportation and transformation may occur. We become more than an observer, more than a bland commentator. A natural self moves with the integrity of a river. The turns, the ironies, the dry seasons, flood states, none of this devalues the river. What we're calling for is embodiment, for reincarnation of self and soil. Barry Lopez refers to two landscapes, one outside the self and the other within. In his chapter titled Landscape and Narrative, he explains the connection of story and our natural self. Quote, a story draws on relationships in the exterior landscape and projects them onto the interior landscape. The purpose of storytelling, he says, is to achieve harmony between the two landscapes, to use all the elements of story, syntax, mood, figures of speech, in a harmonious way to reproduce the harmony of the land and the individual's interior. Inherent in story is the power to reorder a state of psychological confusion through contact with the pervasive truth of those relationships we call the land. If I may substitute poetry for story, I believe what he claims for narrative is equally true for verse. The relationship between land and the inner self is the beginning and perhaps maybe the end of art. So I want to be a natural self, which is to say I want my true sense of self with its failures, its limitations, its identities, its heritage, its anxiety, its temperament, all of that to be merging, transforming, making myself comfortable with myself, fit to dwell on planet Earth as steward and benefactor. Writing like there's no tomorrow may remind us of McKibben's essay, The End of Nature, in which the daily routine is forever altered and the possibility of cataclysmic disaster is now foreseeable. But another aspect of this title involves the existential moment. That is, tomorrow does not yet exist. There is only now, which ironically may help us redeem the past, and without which no future is possible. Becoming a natural self will not magically end the problems of our society, our world. We are, after all, the creature that fouls its own nest. And I'm not foolish enough to believe we'll make a garden on earth. Really, the notion of a grand garden is part of the problem. We're afraid of wilderness. We want cultivation because we want control. We want to dominate, to satisfy indulgence, when wildness requires cooperation and submission. Becoming a natural self grounds us in wildness, plants us in fertile soil that redefines the present moment, that helps us navigate the waste and destruction others overlook, if not sadistically enjoy and profit from. The natural self knows how to die. We follow our ancestors, our writing predecessors in the Romantic movement, and we join the modern naturalists in the contemporary blend of all things ecological in the patient return of ancestral death, and thus live a life made meaningful by what it sheds. Shedding a skin of vile greed and polite but violent consumerism, replacing it with a vulnerable, vital energy without which we might as well get on that rocket and go to Mars. Now, you know I've twice referenced Mars because for some reason this lifeless planet holds some weird fascination with Americans. Maybe it has something to do with war. Once I was asked to contribute to an anthology of surreal and magical realism poetry, so I created a series of 4 poems, each located on Mars. Each of the poems represented a stage of human life. Of course, I use Mars context symbolically as an ironic foil to suggest how life could be and ought to be. So now, with fear and trepidation, I'll read the final poem of that 4-part series. Dying on Mars. I never left. I thought I would. Planned to go more than once, but things kept me there. I became fixated with red glow. At the end of your days, your mind looks backward but finds little to hold. The empty bucket has betrayed me. It can never be filled if the holes cannot be patched. So here I remain, made the best of it. Tried to enjoy myself fishing, watching birds, and making love. What else would you want? My only complaint, everything I see now, everything I have seen for years is red. I know only red. Fish, birds, even my beloved lives red before me in the rocky surface. I made a home, red in these strange hills, where I hope at last someone will dig a good grave for me and erect a white cross, unstained for a time by red. Poetry offers a way for us to enter our sensory lives to find a truer inner spring, the beauty of which, never idealized, nonetheless serves as an act of defiance. Imagine someone reading Mary Oliver's Wild Geese to the Republican Congress. They wouldn't get it, but we would. We do. Wild geese, you don't have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I'll tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep rivers, the mountains and the trees. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Yes, read it to your congressman. They won't get it, but we would, and we do. Thank you.
Those were both very powerful. I hope you all feel moved and more willing to appreciate nature and not guilted about the current state of the environment. I think the solution is to be curious and to explore that curiosity and express it in the things that we appreciate about the environment rather than allowing our brow to be darkened with remorse for things that necessarily we did not do. Please, one more round of applause for... Very quickly because I know you're all hungry, I just want to mention that we have some really exciting programming tomorrow, which is our last day of Litfest. Please, if you don't have a program, take one of these off the table. You can also scan this QR code. It will take you to the Eventbrite page, which will give you more detailed information about the programs, about the participants. It'll have their bios. It'll have maps to locations, etc. But I did want to mention one event that is not on this program, but is on Eventbrite. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., NYU Professor Tim Tomlinson will be delivering a craft talk with a little bit of a reading of his own work, right? Yeah. In Main Hall, 1307, does that sound right? Sound right, I think. It's on Eventbrite. That will be at 10 a.m. So please, if you're interested in innovations and conventions of short fiction, that's going to be the topic. And Tim came all the way from New York, so please make his trip worthwhile. Attend the craft talk tomorrow morning. After that, we have the Tulsa Litfest Book Fair. We have over 75 participating authors and publishers this year, so we're really excited to see how that turns out. We're keeping our fingers crossed that it's not a total debacle, because we tripled the number of artists from last year. So we think it's going to be great. That will be in Main Hall across the parking lot in the atrium right outside the library. That's 11 a.m. to 2. At 1:30 at Magic City Books, Tyra E. Jones will be reading. Then at 3, we have Writer's Recess with Damian Shade, Nicholas Claro, Liz Blood, Joy Clark, Portland Hopton Harjo, and Carl Jones. That's at Pershing Studios, hosted by Cassidy McCants. And then we'll have closing night festivities at Chimera with music by Damian Shade and a reading from Sarah Thuncan Matthews, hosted by NYU Tulsa. Thank you so much for your presence, for your attention. Now please go gorge yourself. We don't want to take any empanadas home, so if you need to stuff some in your pockets, you are more than welcome to. Have a great night, everybody. We hope to see you at the Haiku Death Match, and if not, we'll see you tomorrow.